Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something a little different. We're blowing the dust off one of the most infamous, haunting cold case files in American history. I want us to set aside the Hollywood myths, ignore the decades of wild rumors, and just look strictly at the cold, hard facts of the Black Dahlia case. Right, let's dive into this by bypassing the gossip and going straight to the killer's own evidence. Just listen to this message sent directly to the local papers. Here is Dahlia's belongings. It's taunting, it's highly calculated, and as we'll see, it is a prime example of the physical evidence we actually have to work with. Or, I should say, the evidence that was intentionally stolen from us. Section 1. Scene of the crime and forensic anomalies. Let's rewind the clock back to the hazy morning of January 15, 1947, out in Los Angeles. A mother is walking with her daughter and spots something in an empty lot. At first, she actually mistakes it for a discarded store mannequin. But any veteran detective will tell you the reality of a crime scene is always far more grim. It wasn't a mannequin. It was a human body. And what had been done to it, well, it would horrify even the most seasoned investigators. From a purely clinical, forensic standpoint, the bizarre anomalies found at the scene stand out immediately. The body had been cut clean in half at the waist. The surgical precision of this cut strongly suggested to detectives that the killer had specialized anatomical knowledge. Furthermore, the body was completely drained of blood. And the most glaring anomaly of all, there was absolutely zero blood found at the crime scene itself. The body had been arranged, almost put on display. For an investigator, this screams one absolutely crucial fact. This empty lot was merely a dump site. The primary crime scene was somewhere else entirely. Before we go deeper into the case file, we really have to talk about the victim. Her name was Elizabeth Short, and she was only 22 years old. Born in Boston, she'd moved out to LA chasing that dream of becoming an actress. Now, while she didn't have any real acting credits yet, she had this habit of dressing elegantly, almost exclusively in black. That distinct, striking style is exactly what earned her the famous newspaper moniker, the Black Dahlia, which was actually inspired by a popular movie out at the time called The Blue Dahlia. Section 2. Fast identification versus contaminated evidence. So, we have our victim. Now let's look at how the investigation actually kicked off. Honestly, it started out with some genuinely brilliant, rapid police work. Mere minutes after arriving at that horrific scene, fingerprints were taken. Those prints were immediately transmitted to the FBI using an early, almost fax-like piece of technology called sound photo. Within just 56 minutes, less than an hour, they had a positive identification confirmed. That kind of turnaround is incredible, even by modern standards. But sadly, this initial burst of speed sharply contrasts with the incredibly frustrating dead ends that were about to completely plague the case. Which brings us to a very specific evidence-handling disaster. A week after the murder, a package arrived at the local newspapers. It contained that cutout letter we discussed earlier. Inside the envelope were Elizabeth's birth certificate, some photographs, business cards, and her personal address book. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is this. Every single item inside had been methodically wiped entirely clean with gasoline. The killer knew exactly what they were doing. They used that gasoline to completely obliterate any trace of fingerprint evidence. Let me tell you, it is a detective's absolute worst nightmare, having the killer's own package right there in your hands, completely stripped of any forensic value. You can just feel the crushing frustration of the detectives working this case. They had her personal address book right there in their hands. It should have been a goldmine of tangible leads. They went out and methodically interviewed roughly 75 different men listed in those pages. 75 extensive interviews, and what did it get them? Absolutely nothing. Zero solid leads. They hit a massive, massive brick wall. Section 3. The investigative noise. When the hard physical evidence goes cold, cases often get incredibly complicated by outside factors. Let's shift our focus to the massive amount of distraction that hindered the real, on-the-ground forensic work. We call this investigative noise. And in this case, the noise was deafening. 60. That number represents the initial wave of false confessions. Think about the psychology of that for a second. Over 60 people came forward during the active investigation claiming, "I'm the one who committed this murder." And over the decades, that number didn't shrink. It exploded to over 500 confessions, hundreds of people seeking attention, falsely claiming responsibility for a horrifying crime. For a detective, this is an absolute disaster. Every single confession has to be fully investigated, meaning incredibly valuable time and resources were wasted, completely drowning out legitimate leads. And guess what? Not a single one of those confessions turned out to be true. Section 4. Analyzing the primary suspects. So, weeding through all of that noise, who were the actual legitimate targets of the investigation? Well, we can measure our top suspects against those distinct forensic anomalies we established right at the beginning of this explainer. Let's mentally map out a suspect board and see how this builds a picture. Over 150 people were investigated, but we're going to focus on the top 3. First up, Dr. George Hodel. He was a doctor, meaning he absolutely possessed the anatomical knowledge required. The LAPD actually bugged his house and captured a highly suspicious recording. Next is Leslie Dillon. He worked as a bellhop, but had previously worked as a mortuary assistant, meaning he routinely handled and dissected dead bodies. Unfortunately, the case against him was dropped due to clerical errors. Finally, George Nolan. Decades later, his daughter Janice claimed she witnessed him commit the murder when she was just a child. However, her own family heavily disputed her story, suggesting it was a false memory that she genuinely believed. Let's filter out the disputed claims and compare our 2 strongest forensic matches side by side. On one hand, Dr. Hodel. Police recorded him explicitly saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now." I mean, that is a brazen, incredibly arrogant statement from a man with a medical background. But on the other hand, look at Leslie Dillon. He possessed the exact specific dissection skills required by our forensic profile of the killer. Both of these men firmly fit the terrifying criteria of someone who could cleanly bisect a body and drain it of blood. Yet, incredibly, charges were never filed against either of them. Section 5. A larger serial pattern? This leads us down a very dark, unsettling path. I want you to zoom out with me for a second. Consider the extremely specific forensic signatures of this case, the bisection, the total draining of blood. Could these signatures belong to a larger, horrifying pattern of serial violence? Some crime researchers and seasoned investigators believe Elizabeth Short wasn't an isolated victim. Look at the Cleveland torso murders that occurred between 1934 and 1938. The victims in those unsolved cases suffered incredibly similar clinical dismemberments. Then, look closer to home. Just 1 month after the Black Dahlia was found, another woman named Jean French was brutally murdered right there in Los Angeles in an equally horrifying manner. If these cases are connected, it means Elizabeth Short was part of a string of murders committed by a phantom who completely evaded justice for years. Section 6. The unsolvable cold case. Which brings us to the weary reality of the present day. Let's fast forward to right now, the year 2026. After all the suspects, all the wild theories, and all the decades that have passed, this remains one of Los Angeles's oldest, officially unsolved cases. Now, you might be wondering, why can't modern science solve this? I mean, we have incredible DNA forensic labs today, right? Well, the answer goes right back to the killer's calculated moves back in 1947. Contaminated evidence. Yes, the physical proof has severely degraded over nearly 80 years. But more importantly, the original evidence tampering, like systematically wiping down her personal address book and photos with that gasoline, destroyed the biological material right from the very start. That gasoline wash effectively rendered modern DNA testing completely useless. The killer managed to erase the evidence before the science to even analyze it existed. As we close this case file today, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought. Is the killer's name still hiding somewhere in those dusty documents? Whether it was the arrogant doctor, the mortuary assistant, or maybe a name we've never even heard of, the scariest part of this whole case isn't just that the killer got away. No, it's the deeply unsettling realization that whoever did this simply walked away from that empty lot, washed their hands, and lived the rest of their life completely anonymously right among us. What do you think? Who do you believe the evidence really points to? Keep questioning the facts, stay curious, and I'll see you in our next explainer.